Here's where it all starts. A family of 4 buys a house in a small town. Not a bad place, but they get it for cheap. The weird kind of cheap. The why hasn't anyone else taken this yet cheap that flies a big red flag over the whole neighborhood. Didn't matter to them. They take what they can get. It doesn't take long for things to go south. Dad can't sleep. Mom is stressed out of her mind and can't figure out why. And the kids start hearing voices from under the house. They tell the parents. It's not like they'd keep that to themselves, right? But every time the parents check, they don't find anything and they don't see anything. It's just nerves, they figure. What else? So the parents go back to their own brands of falling apart, and the haunted little spot under the house gets ignored until one day those voices speak up a little bit louder and tell little brother it's time he gets rid of big sister. Everybody loses their minds. Don't worry about the kids, they're fine. She fought him off, the mom intervened, and the dad got them the hell out of there. They moved on with their lives. As far as I know anyway. No, the thing to worry about is the voices. See, they sent some people to check the place out, look for anything haunted, I guess, and it turns out there really were voices coming from under the house. Or more accurately, sounds that could be mistaken for voices when filtered through the imagination of a child. After a while, they managed to find the culprits. There weren't any ghosts, of course. There were bugs, and this is where we come in. I got there a couple days after Dr. Weevil. He didn't talk much at first, but he walked around smiling like he won the lottery. I couldn't blame him. Plenty of insects communicate with sounds. Usually it's as simple as rubbing their wings together or something similar. But these things were unique, never before seen. We got the first chance at studying them. The doc kept my job simple. He gave me 2 words: look and listen. So that's what I did. You wouldn't have believed these things. They looked like someone's nightmare of a cicada. Their movements didn't even make sense with their bodies, like they were animated by someone who didn't understand anatomy. But it worked. By which I mean they made noise. They had 2 modes, a whisper and a scream. The whisper was more common, which isn't surprising, considering those parents who never managed to hear anything. Credit to the kids, though. It did almost sound like a voice. Multiple voices, maybe, because it was hard to narrow down exactly where it was coming from if I wasn't looking directly at the bugs. A few times I even thought one must have escaped. Then there's the scream. Now that was really something else. It felt like it came from inside my head. I could hardly move when I heard it. I put it down as a likely defense mechanism. Couldn't imagine it being good for much else. I spent days observing the bugs. Dr. Weevil spent days doing God knows what, but he sure was determined. He'd take one off, do whatever experiment he must have seen fit, and sometimes even come back with a few new ones. He was always working. I didn't think he even slept, and he sure wasn't showering because the man smelled like hell. One day I asked him if he was taking the bugs away to breed or something. He told me, "They're coming." He wouldn't explain further even when I pushed it, just, "They're coming." The next day he brought in the mice. This was the first experiment the doc had me watch. I wish I had left right then, just said no thanks, and moved on with my life. Instead, I stood there. I just stood there and watched Dr. Weevil take one of those mice and give it to the bugs. I've seen fear before. Follow bugs for long enough and you'll see it all in the end. But this, the look on that mouse, this is the kind of fear that shouldn't even exist. I was surprised the poor thing didn't just die of shock, but some part of me felt it wasn't allowed to. These bugs, they surrounded the mouse, watching and whispering while it panicked, ran in circles, clawed at the glass, just did whatever it could to get away. Then one bug, it stepped in front of the others and it screamed. The mouse froze. The fear was still there, I could see that, but it couldn't move. That one bug walked up to the mouse, climbed on top of it, and it, this is the only way I know to describe it, attached itself. I couldn't tell you how long it took. Felt like an eternity. But eventually, the bug managed to burrow itself deep enough inside that it became nothing more than a bump in the mouse's little back. And then the mouse started moving. That's about when I managed to look away and notice Dr. Weevil's reaction to all of this. He was smiling. Hell, he looked proud. He watched the little mouse bug stumble around and produce some odd mockery of the bug's usual whisper. "It's mimicry," he said. The only response I could manage was, "It doesn't sound like a mouse." Dr. Weevil turned to me and shook his head. "She's still young. She'll learn." And learn she did. This was mad science, but as foolish as it seems now, I wanted to see it through. By observing, I mean. I needed to see more. Not more of what happened to that mouse, of course. I asked the doc not to give any more to the bugs, and he gave me a simple, "Won't need to." No, I just wanted to understand these things. It took a day for the mouse bug's whisper to become a squeak, a few hours more for the other mice to welcome her back, and by the next day, all the other mice, save one, had little bumps of their own. No more mice had been taken out of their cage and no bugs were put in. Dr. Weevil even let me check the camera footage to prove it. The mouse bug itself had done something to the others. It used them to breed. So why leave one alone? The doc wouldn't give a theory on that. I tried asking him, but he was listening to the bugs. They were whispering again. He asked me if I figured out what they were saying yet. I told him they're not saying anything. You'll learn. People from the community started reaching out, not to us, just to me. I had kept to myself since arriving there, and assumed Dr. Weevil did the same. Not to be rude, we were guests there. We were just focused on work. Or at least, that's what I thought. They wanted to talk about Dr. Weevil. He's a strange man, they said, and people didn't feel comfortable with him in their town anymore. One in particular, an older man who lived in this town his whole life, said he drove by that abandoned house and saw the doc there, whispering to the dirt, laughing, then whispering some more. The old guy tried to stop and ask if everything was okay. He said Weevil looked at him with this mean, hateful expression, the kind you'd have to put real effort into making, then turned around and sprinted into the woods. Weird thing is, that happened days before the old man reached out. I had seen the doc that morning. He seemed, maybe not normal, but like his usual self. I went to the lab. I planned on telling Dr. Weevil he needed some time off. He was losing it. I felt responsible, maybe because I let it go on for so long, and I needed to get him away from those bugs. Dr. Weevil wasn't there, so I did the only thing I could think of. I checked the cameras, not just for that day. I went back to the beginning. I checked all the times I wasn't around. Day 1, before I even got there, he talks to the bugs. Day 2, he spits something out of his mouth and they eat it. Day 3, he takes a few bugs and lets them crawl around him. His mouth, his nose, his eyes. He exaggerates facial expressions the whole time. Day 4, I catch a view of him out the window staring inside, watching me when I thought I was alone. On and on. I watched it all and I thought about the little mouse bug and I realized something. I never talked to Dr. Weevil at all, never worked with him, never even met him. The last thing I watched. He sits alone in the middle of the room, must have been just after I left. The bugs and mice are out and they're crawling all over him. He looks at the camera and somehow, it's like he knows. He knows I figured it out, it was them the whole time. I did what that family of 4 did. I got the hell out. I heard from the police not long after. They found Dr. Weevil dead in the lab, no sign of bugs or mice. They tell me they've got witness testimony seeing him well after his estimated time of death. They ask if I can make sense of it. I told them everything I've told you. And after long enough silence to make me think the call dropped, they told me something I heard from Dr. Weevil when I still thought he was Dr. Weevil, and still thought I was the one doing the observing. They're coming.